This is the Heritage Park Theater where they're playing Evil Dead Rise, Super Mario, The Covenant, Big George, Guardians of the Galaxy, Love Again, and Book Club. Oh, and if I could, this is as much of the butchers and the bakers as they'll let me get past copyright. Here's a test of camera stability and oncoming light traffic. As well as, hey, how's this Bluetooth mic working? Can you guys leave comments with the different camera angles? I like this one better, I think. But how's the Bluetooth mic working out for you? Is this safe? I mean, it's out of my hands, firmly attached to the board. Eisenhower, is this a road? Can we turn now? Does it have pavements? His feet are still in the flame, and we're still not on the pavement. Woo! Did you see that? Now see, if the camera was the other way, like the first time, you definitely would have saw that. This way, I don't know if you saw it. And here comes some more bright lights. Turn around every now and then. I miss pavement that doesn't make those clouds.
The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. If you want to be free from fear and the one of authority, then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for the good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on wrongdoers. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of the possible punishment, but also because of the matter of conscience. This is why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, who have given their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Okay. This is a controversial passage. Governing authorities are really bad. And what's interesting, of course, is that let's see, I'm trying to think in the 50s. I don't think Nero was in charge yet, but it will be a Roman emperor that kills Peter and Paul. Yeah, it was Nero. But I'm just trying to think about who was the emperor when Paul writes this. So this passage, boy. First, let's just talk about. We've talked about law number 1 and law number 2. Israel gets freed from Egypt by God. That actually has a lot to do with this, because what Paul is saying here would not be terribly controversial for his listeners, because everyone in that day had a pretty standard assumption about hierarchy. You have God, or the gods, on top, and then you have king, emperor, and you have this great chain of being, and people then are at different stratas in different ways. And so if you look at the book of Exodus, for example, it's God that topples kings. And if you look at, let's say, we're spending time at the 11 o'clock service talking about Israel basically on the way to Advent. God topples the kings of Israel. I don't know if people noticed, but when I think it was in Hosea, you had Jeroboam or Jehu toppled King Ahab, and then Jehu's dynasty with Jeroboam II, they were held accountable for the killing of Ahab. And that was interesting because Ahab was no good king. Yes, and it was prophesied that Jehu would. And so in the Bible, there's this interesting way of talking where on one hand, everything that happens is to a degree, in a certain way, attributable to God, but then evil happens, and evil is not attributable to God. And so there's always this tension in the way the Bible talks with respect to this. And there have been lots of ways in which Christians have talked about this in the past. There's basically a sense of God's permissive will, that God permits things to happen, and then let's say God's perfect will. And this is something that if you pay attention, you'll see people talking about. But nobody ever seems to quite put them next to each other too often and say, now there's a tension in here about how this should work. And that same tension is in this idea about governing authorities. The idea is always that God will condemn governing authorities. And so when governing authorities fall, like the Babylonians take Jerusalem, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more today because we're going to talk about Jeremiah. It's very clear that according to Jeremiah, God brings the Babylonians to judge Israel and Jerusalem and Judah. But at the same time, God also has... This stuff is so hard to talk about. Let's first talk about sowing and reaping. Are we going to get to talk about Dune?
That wasn't what I was planning to talk about.
Oh, okay. Well, we don't have to talk about Dune. Sometime maybe you and I should have a conversation about Dune, because I just finished the first book, and I started the second, and I had thoughts, and I love that you're engaging with Damien. I'm going to talk with Damien coming up in a little while, but it's the corner's working, baby. Keep doing what you're doing. But what was your question now, Michael?
Well, my question, is more related to symbolism, and I listened to the audio book that Josh Butler put out, and I know you would. At one point, you said you were going to have a conversation with him. Is that?
I have to circle back because that was before before my trip to Europe and everything, and so then I couldn't make that work. So I have to get back to him and do another conversation with him. But I do want to do a little bit more reading of his before we talk. So
yeah, I mean, the book was great, I thought, and I think it's.
He did put out an audio book, you said?
Beautiful, Beautiful Union. It's the one about sex.
Oh, it's the one he got into all that trouble for.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Well, so here's my thought. So, because he's evangelical, and so we're having more evangelical, maybe people. A guy at my church actually came up to me the other day and said, "Hey, what do you know about Jonathan Pajot?" Because Jonathan is speaking at like a conference for his kids go to like a classical charter school, and Jonathan Pajot is going to be a speaker at their conference or something. So so like this stuff is cropping up or whatever. But you know, I've noticed, and what that book is kind of talking about, like in our culture, like there's a couple symbols that paganism loves. Like let's see, like if you can see, I don't know if you see it somewhere back there.
I love it. We have a question with a visual aid.
Yeah, well, I'm at a job site, and there's those like there's these portable toilets here, and if you go into those, there's a handful of symbols that will be displayed by bored people in there, and they're the same ones you find in Pompeii and all over ancient Greece and all this.
They're archetypal.
Yeah. But when we're getting a lot of our kind of newfound knowledge of symbolism through these Christian traditions, where they've had monastic orders and celibate priesthoods, these are people that spent all their time contemplating every symbol except for those ones. But on the other hand, like you have like people like Malcolm and Simone, and they're just putting that, like, that's a central topic in their their conversations or whatever, just a frank discussion about sex and all these things. And I mean, I think, are we missing out by not taking advantage of that powerful symbolism?
Oh boy. Attention is important, and whatever is true, whatever is just. I mean, think about what the Apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians. Focus on these things. So I would say, let's find symbols that edify rather than, yeah. So I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, because I think there's certainly, because in my hopeful take in opposition to Malcolm and Simone is, I think that like the Jesus people kind of thing, the Jesus revolution, there's going to be at some point an influx of urban monoculture people to our churches, and they're not gonna have the we don't talk about these things that way, like filters built in. So I don't know. I mean, how do we prepare for that? Like, his book is great because he diffuses a lot of the awkward.
I liked his first book a lot, and so I haven't read his next book. I'll have to look at it before I talk to him. But I think the reaction. There was just recently an article in the New York Times by Ruth Graham, looking at like the conservative calendar with like hot conservative chicks with like guns and bikinis and stuff, and she's like, "What's this about?" So I think your question is a good one, because stuff comes round, and it's good. It's good. Peterson's quoting of Jung that sometimes you have to look in low places. So that's a great question, Michael. All right, Michael. Well, you keep doing what you're doing, man, and keep talking the Dune stuff. I'm enjoying it. I think it's interesting stuff. So
leave comments, Paul. If you're watching my stuff, I want a comment. So just to know you're there,
All right, I'll leave a comment and say it'll be like my bathroom graffiti. Should I figure out how to make emojis and put bathroom symbols in your comment section?
Yeah, sure. I'll share them on Twitter.
All right, Michael. Thanks a lot. All right.
Hey.
Corner Citizen. Here he is.
Hey, Best
Wait,
Paul.
you don't use your real name anymore? You've gotten that big that,
I mean, honestly, this is just a dodge. A side note, I have no idea where that came from. Are you putting that on?
I had to represent. I mean, I know I get in trouble now and then because I represent and I don't do it in the right way. And then I get called on the carpet, and pretty soon what's going to come is some sort of DNA disciplining, and maybe Grizzle, I'll get a cease and desist letter from who would send me from Lance saying he is now representing Grim Grizz, and I have to stop using Broken Clock Tower Discord branding and symbols because I haven't paid the licensing fee. He's gonna do the licensing grift. That's coming next. Wait,
everyone's about to make money, you know. Everyone's
That's right.
We're all gonna be.
I don't know if it was on the Freddie and Paul show, but Ryan is sometimes on. Ryan is the guy who goes to the African Anglican Church, and they baptized him recently, but he always comes out in the middle of the service to eat our snacks after our church service and to be on the Freddie and Paul show. And last week he's like, "We're not getting paid for this?" Oh, I'm just waiting for Freddie to find the Grim Grizz show. I'm just waiting for Freddie to. And actually, maybe I'll send Freddie Grim Grizz's phone number. That could be interesting, because once Freddie has your phone number, you hear about it. You hear from him about 4 or 5 times a day. So, Chad, you want me to give him your number, Chad? Chad's not sure. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alan. What's your question?
I'm still going by Alan. I just didn't want to channel with my name, whatever.
I totally understand.
For the chat, I want to point out that Paul's doing the magic trick right now. Like, he's doing, like, I like pointing out that it's about asking questions, but then he ends up getting you to talk more than you want to talk. So this is how the magic trick gets done. So I'd like to point out, this is the spirit of the age, spirit of the corner, in my opinion. And I'm really bad at it because I like talking, but Paul's really good at it. So the question I had is you've talked a decent amount about a YouTuber a relationship YouTuber, initials go by HM. I'd prefer not to use his.
Yeah.
And one thing that I keep thinking about every time I see his content is no one's talking about. He's talking about the agent, and no one's talking about the arena. All he talks about is how to win the game.
Wow.
And no one talks about the game we're playing. And it's like, the reason he's popular is because he explains how to win the game. But we don't have to play the same game. You can make a new game. Or and the game's always changing anyway, so it's always going to be different. And you're always but it's like, as someone who goes to like a conservative church, yeah, girls think it's cool when you know how to, like, when you can quote the Bible and quote scripture. And that's not like, they're not pretending that, like, they actually do that because you're winning in the arena of, this particular arena. But if you go up to a girl on the street and you're like, "Hey, like, ever heard of John 3:16?" Like, I mean, that one.
Hey, girls in the church arena that are really into it find male Christian competency hot.
Yeah.
Anybody who, I've had pictures of me and my wife, especially when we were young, anybody that saw the two of us together would say, "Wow, Paul sure married up." Well, again, in that church arena, Christian competency is hot. And so he and I are going to have a conversation coming up. It's on the calendar. So, which could be interesting, because I don't know if he's going to show his face. I have no idea how that conversation is going to go, but I'm going to approach it. But it's more difficult with people that they don't use their real name, and they never show their face. And so then, by virtue of what we are doing in this little corner is both sort of the epitome of what YouTube could be and anti-YouTube, because it's anyway. So no, you're exactly right. And I've watched a lot of his content, and I often come away thinking, yeah, he's a sharp guy. He's making good points. But there's way more to this story that doesn't get committed in his little 3 or 5 minute videos. So hopefully we'll get at that. And I know he's into integral theory, because that comes through in his videos. So, I don't know. Did you have a question in there?
Oh, yeah. Just how can we talk about the arena? How can we talk about... Because, he always uses the, like, women now are like X. And I get that you have a 3-minute video, you gotta set it up. But it's like... Maybe there's a spirit of the age that is broad, but like you're obsessed with like this like, oh well, the arena's just kind of always there and it's always the same. So women are like this these days. They used to be like that, but this is how you win the game. And I'm like, no, there are a million different arenas that you could win that game inside of. And maybe there's some threads that pervade all of them. Like, I think it's Sam is talking in the chat is talking about competency. But competency in what? Competency how? And that's just one. I mean, like, and what you define is being attractive competency. Maybe you worked to become competent and looking good, but maybe you were just born beautiful. It's like, are you competent? And like, competent, you know, it's something like competency. Yeah, it's across all domains, but because it's across all domains, it's so broad as to almost be meaningless.
Well, competency as a term, but each arena has its own competencies.
Yeah.
And so, and like beauty is a really tricky one because it does cut across, but it's a transcendental.
Yeah.
So is goodness, the good guy.
Yeah.
And so the truthful guy. You want to see a woman angry? Lie to her. Oh, I mean, there's a transcendental. You lie to a woman or lie to a man. So those are the transcendentals. But maybe what we need to do, we need to have some more. We need to have some more group conversations. If you want to put together a group that wants to talk about this, because I've done it with Rod and Catherine and Eamon, and I hope to do more with them. But if you want to put together another group to talk about this, I think it's good. And if you can't wait for me, put together another group. We got enough channels. Chad will put it on his channel. Chad will put almost anything on his channel, right, Chad? He says yes. So, yeah, but I think this is a perennial topic here because, well, we got a lot of young men and a fair number of them are single, and they'd like to not be single. And we don't have, but what we should do is find the female TLC out there. And I don't know, is there another flotilla of eligible young women that would be compatible with our TLC dudes?
We've crash landed in this planet of only. We've crash landed on the planet of only women who need to reproduce their species. I don't know if we'll find that. The Amazonians have captured us, and but yeah, I mean, absolutely. I guess maybe this isn't a question, and maybe I'm coming on to more make a point, but in my mind, the arena is doing the heavy lifting that so often someone like HM puts on the individual. And he's saying, become so big and important and good that the woman, she derives all sense of self. She can't help. You're the 1% dude. 100 women are going after one guy. Become so big and strong and powerful that you can provide everything. You can provide shelter, food. You're beautiful. And I know this isn't that much of a question, but it's just like, I keep screaming at my phone. That's what the community does. That's what the community, you can't, every guy can't be the 1%. A, definitionally. Yeah. And B, it's just like that, it's great if you can be that, but I don't even think you'd want to if you could. Yeah. I mean, imagine saying to your wife, you're going to be my therapist, you're going to be the maid, you're going to be, it's just why don't we talk about communities that are healthy enough to provide some structure and also support that, not every man is going to be the, ultra Nietzschean Ubermensch. And it's just I get it, because it works in some sense. If you become the Ubermensch, good things probably will happen. Yeah. But, not everyone. So, I don't know. That wasn't much of a question, but it just, I don't know. I'm just screaming at my phone. This is a way to get people interested in church, in community. It's not just oh, you'll feel good and it'll be so nice. It's no, it'll actually, the things you want are better served. Church can be a great place to meet women. Yeah. That was my strategy. But I was already in Christian school, so. All right. Great to see you, Alan. Thank you. Here he comes. We're saving some of the best for last here. I see the assassins. I just read something this morning, Grizz, and I was thinking of making a video about it, where this dude, he was like an Ubermensch, and assassins were coming for him, and so he knew that he was a great guy with a bow, so he shot the assassin with a bow, but the assassin was able to sort of stagger up there and stick him with a knife.
And I thought, oh, this could be a good assassin story. That's anyway.
They get
Chris,
close sometimes. Just because they fail doesn't mean they don't get close.
Well, I'm glad to see that they have failed up until this point. It's good to see you, Chris.
It's always good when I do. I'm gonna try and bring a saint with me. Let's see real quick. That one I have to get Stephen to translate, but that's the one I'm bringing. I have great news for you. News. You're hosting a Q&A. This is what this was supposed to be, and I only have one question for every time in this stream you've said Grimgriz. And just that's how many questions I have for you. You ready? Yeah. I think a lot of these people needed to be demonstrated how to ask you a question on a Q&A.
That is always the way it is.
So I thought I would do that. The first question is, who is Vaush?
He's a streamer who that thing came about. The guy who was trying to make a channel on modern debate, he contacted me, and he contacted this Vaush guy, and I guess he's kind of a left-wing streamer on left-wing Twitch and YouTube, and said, I want you two to debate about Jordan Peterson. I said, okay. And that's what happened.
Who is Destiny?
The only thing I know about Destiny is that there's this one Rationality Rules video where Rationality Rules is trying to figure out about Papa Peterson, and he says, oh, Destiny gets him right. So that's all I really know about Destiny. Who is Grim Grizz?
And yet, you're devoting significant portions of your channel and this stream talking about these people.
Oh, so define significant portions.
It's the last day and a half?
Well, yeah. Is that significant portions? I've been doing this for 7 years.
What's the connection between Vaush and Destiny?
They're both streamers. They're both left-wing streamers.
And why did you decide to unprivatize your Vaush interview so close to the Destiny Peterson release?
Because I thought that was a good example of having a conversation with a left-wing streamer that actually went pretty well.
Man. Have you seen the new Beetlejuice trailer?
No.
It's coming back out this fall. I'm terribly excited.
I'm going to bring Chad in because we're all just friends here. You can keep asking questions, Chris.
If they come back to me, I certainly shall. Those men have more sullied reputations than Andrew Tate.
Really?
And so, for Peterson or you to voice them is significant.
Really?
Because of the let's see real quick. That one I have to get Stephen to.
Oh, so define significant portion, Chris.
If they come back to me, I certainly shall.
Oh, so define significant portions.
It's the last day and a half?
Well, yeah. Is that significant portions? I've been doing this for 7 years.
What's the connection between Vaush and Destiny?
They're both streamers. They're both left-wing streamers.
And why did you decide to unprivatize your Vaush interview so close to the Destiny Peterson release?
Because I thought that was a good example of having a conversation with a left-wing streamer that actually went pretty well.
Man. Have you seen the new Beetlejuice trailer?
No.
It's coming back out this fall. I'm terribly excited.
I'm going to bring Chad in because we're all just friends here. You can keep asking questions, Chris.
If they come back to me, I certainly shall. Those men have more sullied reputations than Andrew Tate.
Really?
And so, for Peterson or you to voice them is significant.
Really?
Because of their character.
So is this like analogous to Trent Horn's following complaining about them platforming Sam?
I don't think the reasons that we think that these men are bad men are the reasons anyone would think Sam is a bad man.
Well, why are they bad men? I don't know anything about them.
The allegations I've been familiarized with are like cohabitating as man and wife with 14-year-olds and such.
Really?
That's the nature I've been told of the character of these men. I didn't do my due diligence on the subject, but I took the source at their word, and because they're usually reliable on such matters, and that's the area of concern
Wow.
that we have about
I would have
Peterson.
thought they'd be in prison for that.
Yeah, or perhaps under the thumb of an agency that could send them to prison at a moment's notice, and therefore they do what that agency says. But anyway, the stream was glowing so hard and my name was dropped so often I felt as though I needed the Beetlejuice.
Well, I think Jordan Peterson needs a Grim Grizz to keep him up to date on these things, because I would never know this if I didn't have you, Grizz. So, you know,
It's a lot of other flotillas on the internet obsess around these sorts of character defects and people getting away with it and famous and rich for it. And so I hear things in the saltier parts of the internet waters.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry I dropped your name so much, Grizz.
It's okay. It's done great. It's done great for me for so far, but now that you're going into the dating sphere, it's getting a little awkward. This move here is, I don't know that I want to be associated with that sort of a conversation.
All right. Well, Chad has left me, so I don't know. Maybe this is the end of the stream. Chad,
Well, you like them about 2 hours, right?
Yeah, I usually go 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 2 minutes now. I could play some branding, I suppose. That would seem appropriate. So, anyway, first talk about basic religion. Basic religion is fairly simple. This is universal religion, and it's sort of like karma. If you do right, you will be blessed. If you do wrong, things won't go well. Now, generally speaking, that is true. And this is sort of what I talk about with respect to law number 1. And sometimes on the video world, when I was comparing different perspectives of God, I would talk about God number 1 and God number 2. And I don't mean that there are 2 gods. These are 2 different perspectives on gods. This karmic perspective is God number 1. Whatever happens, God wills it. And you find this perspective nearly universally in humanity. There's almost no human civilization without some reference or idea of the divine, and they all have this notion. And it's a notion that makes perfect sense in terms of, let's say, general revelation. If you play with fire, you will get burned. If you poke the bear enough, you will get eaten. It's sort of cause and effect, natural consequence. But you have, of course, the story of Job. And then later you'll have the story of Jesus. And Job and Jesus raise a question about this God number 1 and law number 1 perspective. The story of Job is designed to challenge this perspective. And the story is designed to challenge it because it basically notes that people down here below are judging based on their observation. If you play with fire, you'll get burned. If you poke the bear, you'll get eaten. Let sleeping dogs lie. I mean, we have a million little sayings about this, which basically say, be wise. A stitch in time saves 9, all kinds of things. But there's also the case that law number 1 sometimes doesn't work. The person who does everything right suffers, now watch our language here, misfortune. Now, it's helpful to remember that fortune, we tend to think about fortune as this impersonal, we don't look too hard at it, but fortune was a classical god. And in the classical period, they had all sorts of gods to try to account for this tension in the world. And so you have the fates. So you can talk about misfortune. So the god of fortune was against you. The fates are against you. And so on one hand, you have sort of this karmic perspective, but you also know that this isn't the whole story. So in the story of Job, Job does nothing to merit the calamities and catastrophes that befall him. And Job comes to God and says, please fill in the picture for me. Make sense of this. And God's answer for Job is not, oh, okay, Job, Satan and I had a little wager going, and I wanted to demonstrate that you have a loyalty and allegiance that goes on near karmic performance. Now that little thing is pretty important, because if in fact all we have is God number one and law number one, then in some sense human beings, that their agency is lessened and their morality is lessened, because the truly moral person sticks with something beyond its immediate payout. Okay? And so at the end of the story of Job, Job is praised, and Job's friends that kept arguing for this karmic perspective are condemned. They're not killed or anything like that. God basically says, Job was right, they were wrong. But again, at the end of it, Job isn't given an explanation for the catastrophes that befall him. God basically comes and says, right, Job, know your place. That's kind of what he says. And we as egalitarian human beings, we really chafe against that. Job, know your place. How would you brag about it? Until everything goes bad. So then when Jesus comes along, this tension continues to be in the story of Jesus, because go to the Islamic account of the crucifixion. The Islamic account of the crucifixion is that Jesus did not die on a cross because God would not allow such a great prophet essentially to lose. And that again goes back to sort of this God number one karmic perspective. Now, what happens in the crucifixion is that there's also a resurrection. And if you don't have a resurrection, the crucifixion is a very different story, because you're left with good people suffer at the hands of the government. And in the story of Jesus, you have the Sanhedrin sentences a innocent man to death for no good cause, and the Roman authorities execute him for no good cause. And the story is told in such a way that everybody is just sort of, it's in many ways it's a story of corruption. The religious authorities want Jesus dead out of a whole mixture of reasons that are understandable. Envy, Jesus is more popular than they are, and also anxiety about unrest and their position in it. Because if Jesus stirs the pot too much, the Romans may come down and decide that they need to knock some heads and straighten things out. And so the most expedient thing is have Jesus die for the current peace. Now, that's a violation of their own standards of, he's an innocent man. He's done nothing. And then they take him to Pilate. And nobody in that world would have thought Pilate to be a paragon of justice. But what does Pilate do? He's corrupt. He's like, well, it's politically expedient to kill Jesus. And what does he do? Right. He washes his hands of it. And so the entire story is told in a way that demonstrates the corruption of the authorities. And, right, exactly. They're having a court at night. So if, in fact, there's no resurrection, then what's left of, what do we make of this execution? It's just another example of corruption and the violation in that sense of karma. Because if Jesus lived a perfect life, in traditional Old Testament Jewish perspectives, Jesus should have had a wonderful wife, had a bunch of children, he should have lived a life like Job, who after Job's trials was restored to even greater than what he had before. A life like Abraham, a life like the patriarchs, a life like David, a life like Solomon without the corruption. That's what should have happened. And it doesn't. Okay? So, obviously, the resurrection then basically says, similar to Job, but in a more hopeful way, there's more to the story. All right. So when you read this passage in Romans 13, let's take a look at what some of the individual, because the passage itself is not difficult to translate. It's not a passage that is unclear about. It's not unclear about what the text itself says. David Bentley Hart, every soul should be subordinate to higher authorities, for there is no authority except under God, and as such are subordinated to God. Now, and those who are in opposition will invite a verdict against them. For the rulers are a terror not for the good, but for not for the good deed, but for the evil. Now, all of this again is very much boilerplate. This is the way the world works. And why is Paul saying that? Well, there's a lot of speculation. We don't really know, because Romans, unlike some of the other books, Eugene Peterson says, be a good citizen, all governments are under God. Insofar as there is peace and order, it's God's order. So live responsibly as a citizen. Now, this word citizen, there's a difference between a citizen and a subject. So what's the difference between a citizen and a subject? Rights. So there's a tendency to push this passage too far. What has happened is an entire worldview change prompted by Christianity and, in fact, the Protestant Reformation. The kind of democracy, so Tom Holland has pushed this democracy. Okay. True or false? Plato was in favor of democracy. False. If you read Plato's Republic, not a democracy. It was all about you have different qualities of people, the golds, the silvers, the bronze, and people should have their station according to their quality. It's a very ancient perspective on order. Greek democracy is not at all like contemporary Christian democracy. Contemporary Christian democracy in many ways is based on the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation introduces a radical new idea that continues to sort of shake up relationships between different Christians. Any idea what this radical new idea that Luther brings onto the scene? What is the difference between myself and someone who might do similar things in the Roman Catholic Church? What is my title? Minister. Neither of you said priest. I'm not a priest. What's the difference between a minister and a priest? The way I dress. The way I conduct services.
Allegedly from God, whereas here in a way it comes from God, but it comes from people.
So in many ways, a priest is part of this traditional hierarchy.
The local congregation has no say in it.
Right.
Diocese.
Right.
And so they can
So Luther comes along with this idea of the priesthood of all believers. Now, Roman Catholic and Orthodox priests have ideas of apostolic succession. Protestants are very horizontal. You have the priesthood of all believers. How is a local priest placed in their location? From the diocese, from the bishop, goes all the way up to the pope. These other churches have this hierarchy of authority but now, I mean, I hear all kinds of chafing under Pope Francis by people who question. Some people say, is the Pope Catholic? No, he's Protestant, by some of the things he says and does. And so governing authorities today, we don't have, was King Charles elected? No, it was hereditary. King Charles is King Charles because he's Elizabeth's oldest son. That is why King Charles is elected. Is Joe Biden president because his father was president? No, his father was never president. Joe Biden is president without his father. Now, we had George Bush. We've had two sets of father-son presidents, but it's an anomaly, and presidents are elected. And so the form of government the world has changed dramatically from this time period. And so then the question is, what do you do with a passage like this? Well, must Christians always vote for the incumbent based on Romans 13? That wouldn't seem right. We have term limits in many of our places. And so all of this changed because in the Enlightenment thinkers many of them Christian, said, where does the authority for our rulers come from? The will of the governed, the will of citizens. They're citizens, they're not subjects. So the background of this passage has changed dramatically. So then the question is, what should Christians do with this? And usually it's basically against violent insurrection. In other words, it's perfectly valid for Christians to vote out their rulers and vote in new rulers because, in a sense, in a democracy, what is establishing the authority? When the President of the United States takes the oath of office, he pledges allegiance to the Constitution. They will follow the Constitution. It will be the rule of law. So this passage gets very interesting because our political situation has changed a lot. And so then you have the question of application. What should this application be for someone living in a democracy? Well, there's usually a lot of question about regicide, killing the king. Well, we don't have a king. And I think the easiest way to understand and the clearest way to understand this passage is basically in terms of where we started talking about it, in terms of wisdom. That this is just standard wisdom about, generally speaking, how you should deal with authorities. When the cops stop you, get out of the car. Or don't get out of the car. They say don't get out of the car. It's basically deference towards people with authority. Respect authority. Because even in our system, that's good advice. Give deference to people. What's that? Nazi Germany is always the example that comes up. And then you have the question of Bonhoeffer. Should Dietrich Bonhoeffer have participated in the attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler? What's that? Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian. He was imprisoned. He was imprisoned for being part of the plot to assassinate Hitler. That's why he was in prison. No, he was in prison for attempting to assassinate Hitler. If someone attempts to assassinate the President of the United States, they will go to jail. And so the question is, for Christians, well, should Christians be involved in such things? And everybody wants sort of the answer in the hypothetical. I don't know if it can be given. And I don't know if this passage alone is going to turn people one way or next or another. Now, I think what's helpful in terms of understanding this passage is by looking at the next part of the chapter. Because again, verses 1 through 7 are basically boilerplate hierarchy. And it's very much under what I would call law number 1 and God number 1. If you obey the powers that be, things will go easier for you. And again, if you look at, say, Martin Luther King Jr., they had civil disobedience. And so Martin Luther King Jr. looked for ways that they could defy unjust authorities and then willingly suffer the consequence in order to change the law. And they did so. That's right. And so they tried to walk a line with respect to that. And you have, in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, Peter and John are told to stop preaching Jesus, and they basically said, well, when you go against God's law, again, even in this traditional hierarchy, God is always at the top of the heap.